All right, so let's continue the French Revolution. Today's focus is going to be on Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a young soldier with a lucky break. The British troops held the vital French port of Toulon. The French artillery battled courageously to retake the port but made little headway. During the fighting, the French captain was wounded, and young Napoleon Bonaparte was chosen to take the wounded captain's place. Napoleon made the most of his chance. He came up with a daring plan to retake the port by surrounding the harbor with 80 cannons. Napoleon convinced the officers above him that his plan would succeed. Within 48 hours, the port was his. The victory showed Napoleon's genius for military strategy and brought him both notice and promotion. There now appeared to be no stopping him. Within 20 years, he would rule most of Europe. Today's learning targets: how did Napoleon rise to power? How did Empire Napoleon come to dominate Europe? What were Napoleon's most important policies? These are the 3 questions you're responsible for answering at the end of this presentation. Napoleon Bonaparte was a ruthlessly ambitious young man. The turmoil of the French Revolution gave him a prime opportunity to rise quickly to power. Within a few short years, he would rise from a mere army captain to become the ruler of France. Napoleon was a brilliant military leader who achieved many early successes. In 1793, he forced the British troops out of the port of Toulon. The following year, he won a dazzling victory over Austrian troops in Italy. In 1795, Napoleon faced off against a mob of royalists trying to regain power in Paris. Using artillery to shoot into the crowd, Napoleon forced the royalists to flee. As a reward for stopping the uprising, Napoleon was put in charge of defending the French interior. He was only 26 years old. The following year, the Directory placed Napoleon in command of French forces invading Italy. Poorly supplied, his troops had to take their food from the countryside. But Napoleon turned this hardship to his advantage. Because his troops were not slowed down by a supply train, they could strike quickly. In Italy, Napoleon won battles against the Austrians and Italians. His victories not only kept France's borders secure, but also won territory for France. Napoleon's future looked very bright. Next, Napoleon turned his attention to Egypt, where he wanted to disrupt the valuable trade between Great Britain and India. He took the French fleet and a large army across the Mediterranean Sea in 1798. Napoleon's forces quickly defeated Egypt's Ottoman defenders and won control of much of Egypt. But the British Navy, under the command of Admiral Horatio Nelson, was on Napoleon's trial. Nelson trapped the French ships. In the long Battle of the Nile, the British destroyed most of the French fleet. After his loss in the Battle of the Nile, Napoleon wanted to cover up his disastrous defeat. He left his army in Egypt under the command of another officer and sailed back to France. He kept his defeat out of the press and exaggerated the successes of the French army, becoming a national hero in the process. Napoleon's ambitions continued to grow. Capitalizing on his status as a national hero, he decided to seize political power. By this time, the Directory had grown weak and ineffective. As a result, some French leaders feared that royalists might conspire to place a monarchy in power. Others feared the growing opposition of European nations, such as Great Britain and Austria, against France. As a result, a group of conspirators began to plot to seize more power for Napoleon. Armed supporters of Napoleon surrounded the Directory legislature and forced members to turn the government over to Napoleon in November 1799. This event was a coup d'état, a forced transfer of power. A group of 3 consuls, called the Consulate, would replace the Directory as the government of France. Members voted Napoleon in charge as first consul. The structure of a republic was still in place, but Napoleon had become a dictator. Why would a nation that had overthrown its king now welcome a new dictator? Exhausted by the chaos of the revolution and constant warfare, the French craved the order and stability Napoleon promised. Napoleon also pledged to uphold some key revolutionary reforms. The people would willingly give up some freedoms if Napoleon could bring peace, prosperity, and glory to France. At first consul, Napoleon moved quickly to strengthen his power over France. Once France was firmly under his control, he set about conquering Europe. Napoleon wanted to make his own power permanent and hereditary. He submitted a plebiscite, a question put before all the voters in 1804. Did they want to declare France an empire? French voters supported him and voted yes. Thus, Napoleon became Emperor Napoleon I. Pope Pius VII came from Rome to crown Napoleon emperor in Paris. As the Pope was about to place the crown on the new emperor's head, Napoleon grabbed the crown and placed it on his own head. This action told the world that no one gave Napoleon his authority. He took it for himself. Desire for empire. Once Napoleon became Emperor of France, he moved to build an empire. He wanted to rule Europe and to extend French power into the Americas. France controlled a number of territories in the Americas, including Louisiana, Florida, and the sugar-producing colony of Saint-Domingue, now called Haiti. When civil war erupted in Saint-Domingue, Napoleon sent an expedition to take back the colony and restore its profitable sugar industry. But the French expedition failed miserably. This failure led Napoleon to abandon his dream of empires in the Americas. He sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States and turned his focus to Europe. In his quest to conquer Europe, Napoleon began a series of wars that became known as the Napoleonic Wars. These wars were an extension of the ones fought between France and other European nations during the French Revolution. During this period of warfare, France became the dominant European power. Although it grew rapidly under Napoleon's leadership, the French Empire would fall apart even more quickly. The Napoleonic Wars lasted until 1815. Keeping France in a state of near continuous warfare for more than a decade. Throughout the Napoleonic Wars, Great Britain remained France's greatest enemy. Britain helped organize a series of coalitions of European nations against France, and British funds helped strengthen resistance to Napoleon across Europe. Napoleon knew that until he could defeat Great Britain, he would have no peace in Europe. Napoleon hoped to invade Britain and defeat it. However, Admiral Nelson and the British Navy, the commander and fleet that had earlier defeated Napoleon in Egypt, stood in his way. The British Navy proved its worth in October 1805 when it defeated a combined French and Spanish navy off of the coast of Spain in the Battle of Trafalgar. On land, Napoleon was more successful. 2 months after his defeat at the Battle of Trafalgar, he won a devastating victory over Russia and Austrian troops at the Battle of Austerlitz near Vienna, Austria. Great Britain continued to defy Napoleon, but this nation of shopkeepers, as Napoleon disdainfully called this country, was vulnerable. Britain's economy depended on overseas trade. If Napoleon could disrupt that trade, he would weaken Britain's ability to fund rebellion in Europe against him. In an effort to disrupt Great Britain's trade with other nations, he planned a blockade. This plan, called the Continental System, prohibited French or Allied ships from trading with Britain. The British responded by requiring all ships from neutral countries to stop in British ports for permission to trade with the French. While trying to enforce these trade restrictions, Britain and France were drawn into other conflicts. One conflict was the Peninsula War, which drew Portugal and Spain into the conflict between France and Great Britain. In spite of some setbacks with Spain, Napoleon managed to take control of most of Europe through treaties, alliances, and victories in battle. The only nations free of his control were Great Britain, Sweden, Portugal, and the Ottoman Empire. In many of the European nations Napoleon conquered, he put his relatives in power. He gave his brothers the thrones of Holland, the Italian states of Naples and Sicily, and the German state of Westphalia. His sisters and even his stepson also held powerful positions. This shows Napoleon's empire of 1812, where his relatives are in positions of power throughout Europe. They helped him control the empire. Though some of these relatives were popular with the people they governed, the fact that each had the same last name served as a constant reminder that Napoleon ruled over all of them. As Napoleon ruled his empire, he also strengthened the power of France's central government. He developed a plan to establish order and efficiency throughout France, which involved reforms in many areas of French society. Many French citizens had despised the anti-religious nature of the French Revolution. Napoleon soothed these feelings by making an agreement with the Pope, called the Concordat. This agreement acknowledged that most French citizens were Roman Catholics. The agreement did not require that they be Catholics because religious toleration was still the law. The Concordat recognized the influence of the Roman Catholic Church in France, but did not return any control over national affairs to the Church. Because Napoleon knew that a good financial system was essential for the stability of France, he established the Bank of France to regulate the economy. He also set up a more efficient tax collection system. These measures ensured that the government would not face the kinds of financial crises that occurred before the Revolution. Under Napoleon's leadership, scholars revised and organized French law and created the Napoleonic Code. This code made laws uniform across the nation and eliminated many injustices. However, it also promoted order and authority over individual rights. Freedom of the press, for example, was restricted by censors who banned books and newspapers for certain political content. In addition, the code was limited in that it only applied to male citizens. The code denied rights for women and allowed for husbands to have authority over their wives. Napoleon also believed that a strong state depended on having strong leaders in government and military positions. He established a network of high schools, universities, and technical schools to educate young men in preparation for those jobs. Napoleon left a legacy in France as well as throughout Europe. In France, Napoleon ensured that some basic ideas of the revolution would remain part of the French government. Historians speak of this period of Napoleon's domination of Europe as the Age of Napoleon. Napoleon made some basic revolutionary ideas part of the French government. These democratic ideas included equality before the law and a representative system of government. In fact, these revolutionary principles were those that Napoleon had approved and supported. Throughout Europe, Napoleon's actions helped fuel the spread of nationalism, a sense of identity and unity as a people. During the Revolution, the French people developed a new loyalty to France as a whole. In addition, Similar feelings of nationalism spread to peoples that Napoleon had conquered. Here are your learning targets again. Remember to answer these questions at the bottom of your notes and look for the other assignment in our classroom.